There was a very interesting hearing yesterday, a Senate hearing related to gun violence and looking at gun violence as a public health issue, something that should be done. There were a number of different witnesses, and there was a very interesting exchange involving Republican Senator John Kennedy, who was speaking to one of the witnesses, Dr. Megan Ranney from the Yale School of Public Health. And he brings up, why do you think there's so much gun violence in Chicago? What sorts of people do you think are committing the violence in Chicago? Is it, constitutional conservatives? He doesn't say this, but this is the picture he's painting. Is it the constitutional conservative types who are either hunters or just buying a rifle for self-defense? Or is it urban gang type people? And Dr. Megan Ranney points out, when you look at the states with the most per capita gun crime, it's actually not blue states, it's red states. Kennedy doesn't like it. This is typical John Kennedy behavior. He's not terrible at this, but fortunately, Dr. Megan Ranney was prepared. And then we're going to talk about some of that data. So here he is bringing this up seemingly out of the blue.
Let me ask you this. Why do you think that Chicago has become America's largest outdoor shooting range? Do you think it's because of Chicago citizens who have no criminal record, but who have lawfully a gun in their home for protection, or perhaps for hunting?
Right.
Or do you think it's because of a finite group of criminals who have rap sheets as long as King Kong's arm?
So Mississippi, Louisiana, and Missouri actually have higher firearm death rates. Obviously, there's certain...
What about Chicago?
So I don't live in Chicago. It's not my primary area of research.
You don't have an opinion on that?
I think there's easy access to firearms combined with environmental conditions, lack of great education. There have actually been studies showing that when you green vacant lots and repair abandoned buildings in urban neighborhoods, you see decreases in gunshots, in violence, as well as in stress and depression in the neighborhoods around them.
No disrespect, Doc, but that sounds a lot like word salad to me.
It's a word salad. And what we know is John Kennedy does not like salads. He's mentioned it before. There are so many different aspects to this that are really important. First of all, it's often framed, the Chicago gun violence situation is often framed as Chicago has such tough gun laws, and yet there is so much gun crime in Chicago. The reality, of course, is that when you can drive 45, 40, maybe 35 minutes from the southern part of Chicago over the border into Indiana, and we've actually looked at the exact gun store that's right over the border when you go into Indiana. When you can drive to Indiana so easily and obtain firearms, when people from Indiana can come to Chicago with firearms so easily, is it really relevant that Chicago itself has so-called strict gun laws? You can't go up north to Wisconsin, as I once did, and myself, it's 50 minutes, something like that. The specific gun laws of Chicago become less relevant when you're surrounded by places where it's far easier to get guns. But we don't even have to go to that. Dr. Ranney is correct. If you look at gun deaths per capita, which you have to do, obviously, if you have a city with millions of people and then rural areas with a couple 100,000 people, by sheer population difference alone, you would expect that there's a lot more of different kinds of crime where there's millions of people rather than a few 100,000. But let's put up on the screen gun deaths per capita. It's Mississippi, red state, Louisiana, red state, New Mexico is a blue state, Alabama's a red state, Wyoming's a red state, Alaska's a red state, Montana's a red state, Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee. These are all red states other than New Mexico. The exception to the rule is that you would have high gun violence per capita in blue states. And of course, why do we talk about states rather than cities? In most cases, the overriding legislation mandating or restricting or related to gun ownership is state level. There are cities that have their own rules when it comes to gun safety legislation, but this is primarily governed at the state level in sort of the broad sweeping policy mechanisms that would impact the general ability of people to obtain firearms. So this entire discussion always gets away from a super basic reality. I'm willing to go beyond the reality. We should talk about this basic reality. We should talk about mental health. We should talk about socioeconomic status. We should talk about gang violence versus mass shootings versus suicides with guns. All of these are real issues, but they're all separate issues that make up this whole. And the whole that is made up is that imagine that there were only 30 million firearms in circulation in the United States rather than 400 million. If there were only 30 million firearms in circulation, can anyone honestly say that we would have just as much gun violence? Of course not. And so we have to start with the ready availability of these firearms and the limited mechanisms that exist to not even necessarily restrict, but just ensure that we know everybody who's getting a firearm, that they are actually being properly vetted. Now, I'm not going to do it again. There's 12 or so different provisions I've suggested for gun safety legislation. No single provision would prevent every single gun crime, but we would deal with a lot of them. You can go back. We'll link to some of those videos. I've done it a dozen times at this point. But this entire, well, how do you explain Chicago? Explain what about Chicago? That you can drive to Indiana or Wisconsin and easily get guns, and also the fact that Illinois is nowhere near the top 10 list of states in per capita gun crime. What about that? And Dr. Rani was well prepared.